The flight attendant hurriedly walked down the passenger cabin, her face clearly showing frustration. She stopped in front of seat 3A, coldly looking down at the woman sitting there. "I need to check your ticket," she said in an irritated tone. What the flight attendant didn't know, and what no one on this flight knew, is that the woman she was trying to embarrass wasn't just an ordinary passenger. This woman owned the airline, and in just a few hours, the flight attendant's world would come crashing down. The first-class cabin was silent, that kind of quiet that only happens right before takeoff. Passengers were relaxing, adjusting their seats, scrolling on their phones, or sipping on their complimentary drinks. Sitting by the window was a calm-looking woman with sharp eyes. Her name was Amara Collins. If anyone on the flight recognized her, they didn't show it. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Amara wasn't traveling with bodyguards and didn't need to announce her identity. Her vast wealth operated quietly, shaping an entire industry without making a fuss. Wearing a form-fitting black turtleneck sweater and elegant trousers, Amara's appearance exuded natural sophistication. The only sign of her status was a delicate gold bracelet, custom-designed, unique in the world. But it could easily be overlooked. Whispers drifted through the cabin as another flight attendant, Megan Carter, walked down the aisle, occasionally stopping to check on passengers. Megan was in her early 40s, with sharp features and a professional smile, but it was somewhat stiff. After years working for Sky Vista Airlines, Megan had built a reputation for being strict and quick-witted, but sometimes overly rigid in enforcing rules. As she approached Amara's seat, she slowed her pace, giving Amara a quick glance. Megan looked down at the small leather bag neatly placed under the seat in front of Amara. The sight made her pause. "Excuse me," Megan tilted her head and said, "I need to check your boarding pass." Amara blinked, slightly taken aback. No one else in the cabin was asked for their boarding pass. The businessman across from her, an older man with salt and pepper hair, was leisurely sipping champagne without being interrupted. A woman a few rows ahead was casually flipping through a magazine. Only she was being asked. Not in a hurry to react, Amara gently reached into her bag, took out the ticket, and handed it to Megan. The flight attendant quickly scanned the ticket. Correct seat 3A in first class, all details matching. But instead of returning it, she hesitated. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Megan's voice was cold but firm. Amara took a slow breath, keeping her tone calm. "It clearly says so on the ticket." Megan stood still, glancing around as if seeking support. A younger flight attendant, Samantha Doyle, passed by but only glanced quickly before continuing toward the galley, leaving a questioning look behind. The passengers nearby began to notice. A businessman 2 rows ahead, Ethan Brooks, subtly shifted in his seat, pretending not to listen. But his curiosity was clear on his face. Megan let out a stiff laugh, no warmth in it. "I'm just double-checking." Sometimes there's confusion about seating. A confusion, Amara noted. Megan's choice of words was interesting, not misunderstanding or system error. Amara was all too familiar with this kind of polite yet pointed suspicion. Situations where someone like her always had to prove she belonged in her seat, while others were never questioned. She extended her hand. "If there's no problem, please return my ticket." Megan hesitated for a moment before reluctantly handing the ticket back to Amara, her fingers gripping it a little longer than necessary. "Enjoy your flight," Megan said coldly, then turned away. Amara carefully placed the ticket back into her bag. The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to shift. The silent gazes of the passengers still followed her, but no one spoke. No one ever did. She turned back toward the window, watching as the last of the luggage was being loaded onto the plane. This flight would be long. What Amara Collins didn't know was that Megan Doyle wasn't done, and the next time she came back, things would spiral out of control for everyone. Passengers around them began exchanging glances, the tension in the air rising like an invisible smoke. Ethan Brooks, the businessman sitting opposite, lowered his glass, watching with cautious curiosity. Amara Collins removed one earpiece and leaned slightly to the side, her voice soft but firm. "If you have something to say, just say it now." Megan's nostrils flared, her patience clearly running thin. "This isn't a discussion," she snapped. "I'm asking you to leave your seat." Amara remained seated, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, her demeanor so calm it was almost uncomfortable for Megan. "What if I refuse?" Megan clenched her jaw, her face hardening. "Then I'll have to call security as soon as we land." That was when the whispers began to rise, small but quickly spreading. The passengers who had been sitting quietly now exchanged worried looks. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding anymore. It had turned into a serious confrontation. Near the galley, Megan's younger colleague, Samantha Doyle, had also noticed the situation. She set down her tray, furrowing her brow, and quickly walked toward the front. "What's going on?" Samantha asked, her eyes flickering between Megan and Amara. Before Amara could respond, Megan interjected, her voice sharp. "She's not cooperating." Samantha blinked, surprised by the tension in the situation. "Not cooperating? With what?" she asked, clearly confused. Megan hesitated for a moment. This was the first time she seemed unsure since the confrontation had begun. Amara sat back in her seat, her eyes sharp as blades, never leaving Megan's. "Actually," Amara spoke calmly, "she never explained why she wants me to leave my seat." The hesitation in Megan's actions didn't escape the attention of the nearby passengers. The entire first-class cabin was now completely silent, every eye watching them. Megan glanced at Samantha, her voice low but tense. "Samantha, what's really going on here?" Standing before the expectant eyes of her colleague and the passengers, Megan took a deep breath, clenching her fists, trying to regain her composure. "I don't believe she actually has a seat here." The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Amara let out a slow exhale through her nose, her voice steady. "I've already shown you my boarding pass." Megan kept her cold stare. "But I need to verify again." A scornful laugh came from behind. It was Sophie Lane, a female passenger in her 30s with glasses, her face showing clear discontent. "Are you joking?" she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Megan stared at Samantha, then turned back to ask, "You've already checked her ticket, right?" Megan hesitated again before remaining silent. Samantha sighed and rubbed her temples. "If there's an issue, it should have been addressed before we took off, not now, in the middle of the flight. We can't keep bothering passengers like this." Megan's face flushed crimson, but she persisted. "I'm just following the company policy." Amara slowly reached into her bag again and pulled out her boarding pass. She took her time, as if to show the entire cabin she had nothing to hide. "Here," she said calmly, her voice unwavering. "Check it again." Megan froze, her hand hesitating, reluctant to take the boarding pass. Without hesitation, Samantha quickly snatched it from her, scanning the details. It only took a few seconds, and she let out a breath before her gaze turned icy as she glanced at Megan. "She's in the correct seat." The murmurs grew louder. Ethan Brooks set his champagne glass down, his arms crossed over his chest, a slight smirk curling on his lips. Megan's body trembled slightly, her throat dry as if the air was thickening, but instead of stepping back or apologizing, she made the most serious mistake of her career. Without saying another word, Megan reached out and grabbed Amara's arm. The grip wasn't strong enough to hurt, but it was enough for everyone to see. And in that moment, the entire cabin seemed to erupt in an astonished gasp. Some passengers shot up, their eyes filled with panic and anger. Amara remained still, unreacting, but her gaze was as cold as ice. Megan's face went pale, and she whispered in a panic, "Samantha!" It was only when she realized what she had done that she quickly let go of Amara's arm. But it was too late. Amara smiled thinly, not in anger or sarcasm, but in a way that seemed to signal the coming storm. She pulled out her phone, her movements slow, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Samantha took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. Amara pressed a button. Lifting the phone to her ear, she spoke as calmly as if calling to make a restaurant reservation. "Control Center, this is Amara Collins, owner of Sky Vista Airlines. I need to report an incident on Flight 112. The cabin plunged into a chilling silence. The name Sky Vista Airlines rang out like a thunderclap in the clear sky, rippling through the cabin within moments. All eyes turned toward Amara, while Megan turned pale, as though the very oxygen in the cabin had vanished. She spoke calmly into the phone. "A flight attendant has acted inappropriately toward me. I will file a formal report after landing." Megan was the first to react, stepping forward with a look of regret. "Ms. Collins, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Amara raised her hand, signaling for silence. Apologies at this point meant nothing. The atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with tension. Some passengers began whispering more loudly. Others had already taken out their phones to secretly record the situation. Ethan Brooks chuckled softly, shaking his head in amusement. "Oh, this is getting interesting." "Oh." Finally, Megan found her voice again, weak and shaky. "Ms. Collins, if I had known, I would have—" Amara coldly interrupted her. "Treat me differently?" Her voice was smooth but sharp, cutting through the stifling air. Samantha's face grew paler with each passing second. She knew, deep down, that everything had already ended for her. No one needed to speak the verdict. The entire cabin, every glance, every whisper, was already delivering it on her behalf. And Amara Collins, the true owner of this sky, didn't even need to stand from her seat. People who once believed they were above the rules. Samantha Doyle had encountered many in her 15-year career. But never before had she made such a massive mistake. And now she knew she had just sent herself down an irreversible path. Amara Collins slowly lowered the phone from her ear, allowing the heavy silence to fill the first-class cabin. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to make a scene. Her power naturally radiated, cold, unyielding, and overwhelming every eye that watched her. On the other end of the line, the voice from the control center was the only one Amara could hear. She listened for a few seconds, then responded, her tone calm but chilling. "Yes, I will remain seated. But when the plane lands, I request an immediate meeting with the head of the flight crew and the HR department." She paused for a moment, then tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving the front. "And I want this one," she gestured subtly towards Samantha, "escorted off the plane as soon as we land." Samantha's knees felt like they were frozen to the floor. "Please, please, Miss Collins," she stammered, her voice frantic. "This is just a misunderstanding." Amara tilted her head, her eyes as cold as ice. "A misunderstanding?" She repeated the word as if reminding Samantha of her own earlier choice of words. Samantha opened her mouth to say something, but once again she swallowed her words. Her gaze wavered. Amara didn't rush her. She let the silence drag on, letting the atmosphere in the cabin grow heavier, pressing down on the trembling shoulders in front of her. Then her voice broke the silence, soft, but as sharp as a blade. "Tell me," she whispered, "why did you think I didn't belong in that seat?" The entire cabin held its breath. No one pretended to be busy anymore. Every eye was fixed on them. Megan Carter stood frozen near the galley, still clutching her service tray, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Ethan Brooks leaned forward, his gaze full of delight, as if watching a play. Sophie Lane, the woman who had spoken earlier, folded her arms across her chest, her face a mixture of satisfaction as though justice had finally come. Samantha's face reddened, her skin burning as if she could feel her entire body about to combust. I, she stuttered, but the words never came. Amara didn't allow her the chance. You touched me? The words didn't need to be shouted. They rang out softly, but their weight was like an undeniable indictment. The whispers in the cabin swelled again, louder, more chaotic. More phones had been pulled out, their screens glowing, recording every moment. Amara leaned forward, turning to Megan Carter, her voice sharp but still composed. Do you know the standard policy when a flight attendant touches a passenger unnecessarily? Megan hesitated for a second, then replied, her voice low but firm. Immediate termination. Samantha's heart stopped. Amara exhaled softly, void of any emotion. Then she turned back to look directly at Samantha, her gaze freezing. I should follow the policy, or give you an exception. Samantha's mouth opened and closed, her chest heaving with desperate breaths. No, it couldn't end like this. Please, Miss Collins. I'm sorry, she begged, her voice breaking. Amara didn't respond right away. She let that pleading fall into the silence like a soundless echo. Then she leaned forward, her voice now low. I know. Those two words, spoken so calmly, were the final strike. Not forgiveness. A verdict. Samantha felt as if her chest was shattering. Her uniform, the one that used to be a symbol of pride, was now just a suffocating shell, clinging to her every breath. The murmurs of the passengers grew louder, their eyes full of disdain, pity mixed with a strange sense of satisfaction. She had lost control completely. And throughout this entire ordeal, Amara Collins had never raised her voice. She had never shown anger. She had never demanded an apology. It was that calmness that drowned Samantha deeper into the humiliation. Megan Carter stood beside, clearing her throat, her voice now more resolute. Samantha, you need to step down. Samantha stood there, frozen, her legs like stone, rooted to the floor. Then, beep! The overhead intercom crackled, breaking the suffocating atmosphere. The captain's voice, calm but authoritative, sounded. Flight attendant Samantha Doyle, please report to the cockpit immediately. The whispers in the cabin stopped dead. A chill ran down Samantha's spine. No, this couldn't be happening. Not this quickly. Passengers turned to look at each other, their gazes filled with anticipation, as if preparing to witness a public trial. Ethan Brooks chuckled. Oh, bad news for her. Sophie Lane sneered. She's done for. Samantha felt her palms sweat. She knew it was over. And now it was time for her to face it. Samantha could feel the weight of the eyes on her as she stood motionless, the sound of her pounding heartbeat filling her ears. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in on her. The security officers stood near the door, waiting. Samantha's legs felt like they were made of lead. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to happen. The world outside this moment didn't exist anymore. Please, she whispered, not knowing whether she was speaking to herself or to the world around her. Just let me go. But there was no escape, no turning back. Her entire life had been upended, and it was too late for regret. She stood there in a daze as the security officers guided her through the narrow aisle. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her thoughts raced, but there was no way to stop the inevitable. She passed by the seats, once her domain, but now they felt so far away. Passing by Megan Carter, who couldn't meet her eyes, Samantha felt a deep pang of embarrassment. At the front of the plane, near the cockpit, the air felt different. Darker, thicker, more suffocating than it ever had been. She had once been someone who dictated the rules of this place. Now she was reduced to nothing more than a passenger, a failure. As she reached the aircraft door, two security officers stood waiting for her. their gaze unwavering. Amara Collins was already there, standing near the entrance, calm and collected, her gaze locked forward as though nothing had transpired. The door opened and the bright lights of the airport greeted her, blinding, cold, and unforgiving. Samantha could feel every ounce of her dignity slip away, disappearing in the glare of the fluorescent lights. "Goodbye, Samantha," Amara's voice echoed softly behind her. Samantha's heart felt like it had been wrenched from her chest. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The shame was too much. Amara stepped into the awaiting vehicle, her posture dignified, unaffected by the storm that had just unfolded. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing the end of the journey. Samantha stood motionless for a long moment, trapped between her past and the irreversible moment she was living through. She finally took one last look at the world she knew, her hands shaking as she walked down the long hallway toward her new, unknown future. There would be no turning back. The doors of the terminal slid open as she passed through them, but the weight of her failure pressed down on her shoulders. The world around her blurred into noise and motion, but it felt like she was in another dimension, one where no one knew her anymore. In the bustling airport, passengers hurried along to their next destinations, unaware of the downfall they had just witnessed. Samantha Doyle was no longer in charge. She was no longer the one who set the rules. Now, she was just a forgotten face in the crowd. The humiliation would follow her, not just through the terminal, but through every step of her future. The whispers would follow her. The looks of judgment would follow her. But most of all, the guilt would follow her. The finality of what had happened, what she had done, was suffocating. As she sat in the waiting area, the weight of her past decisions, her arrogance, her assumptions about others, came crashing down on her. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't outrun the consequences. And then, when she least expected it, the realization hit her. She had made a fatal mistake. Not in the act itself, but in thinking that she could control everything, that she could force the world to bend to her will. She had let her own biases shape her actions, and now everything had fallen apart. Samantha's future was uncertain now. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, and no matter how hard she tried, she would never forget this moment. The moment when she lost everything. This was the cost of a single moment of arrogance, of assuming that someone like Amara Collins didn't belong. And in the end, it was Samantha who didn't belong in her world anymore. The world had moved on, and so had Amara Collins. The door to the airport opened once more, and as the breeze brushed past her, Samantha realized there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. No amount of self-delusion would fix the damage she had done. The end had come. And with that, Samantha Doyle walked out of the airport, no longer the powerful, in-control flight attendant she once was, but just another person whose story had come to an end. The last thing she felt as she crossed the threshold was the crushing weight of everything she had lost. The world outside the airport terminal seemed unchanged, yet to Samantha, it felt like the beginning of her disappearance. She walked through the crowd, her head held high, but the weight of her failure kept her grounded. Her steps felt like an eternity, heavy and slow, as if the very air around her had conspired to trap her in this moment of defeat. The security officers were still at her side, silent and firm. She had no choice but to follow them, the finality of this journey settling into her bones. As they reached the glass doors, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection, the woman she once was, now a stranger to her. Samantha's heart sank as the realization hit her. The life she knew, the power she had wielded for so long, was gone in an instant. She passed by the crowds, unnoticed, yet every step felt like a final march toward oblivion. No one recognized her. No one cared. But she would never forget this moment. Outside, the bitter wind hit her face as she stepped into the cold, sterile atmosphere of the airport parking lot. Waiting there, a sleek black car stood ready, its driver standing next to it, with a professional demeanor. But the person inside, Amara Collins, remained unaffected by the spectacle unfolding around them. Samantha could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the reality of it all settled in. She had no other choice but to step forward, the officers guiding her toward her fate. Amara watched the scene unfold from the back seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She wasn't concerned about what happened next. She had already won the game. The power dynamics that had once been so clearly defined had shifted. Samantha had underestimated her, assumed she was just another passenger, not recognizing who Amara really was. The irony was undeniable. Amara hadn't had to lift a finger. Samantha had brought this upon herself with her own arrogance. Samantha reached the car, the officer standing to the side. She hesitated for a moment, then slid into the back seat, her mind racing. Her eyes stayed glued to the ground, unable to look at anyone, let alone at Amara. As the car began to move, Samantha sat still, the soft hum of the engine doing little to ease the turmoil inside her. The only sound was her own breath, shallow and uneven. She glanced up at Amara, whose expression remained composed and cold, like the calm after a storm. There was no sympathy in Amara's gaze, just the unwavering certainty that she had done what was necessary. And Samantha knew, deep down, that she was right. Amara's voice finally broke the silence, calm but unyielding. "You should have known better." Samantha's heart tightened at the words. She wanted to argue, to explain, but there was no point. The truth was too clear, too brutal. Her mind spiraled back to the moment when she had first doubted Amara, when she had made the assumption that this woman didn't belong in the first-class cabin. She had judged Amara for her appearance, for the way she looked, for the way she seemed to not fit the mold of what a typical first-class passenger should be. But now, the truth was undeniable. Amara had been the one with the power all along. As the car made its way through the busy streets, Samantha could only think about the finality of her situation. There was no going back. Her career was over. Her life as she knew it was done. Amara hadn't just outplayed her. She had exposed every flaw, every misstep Samantha had ever made. And Samantha couldn't escape the harsh reality that in the end, she had destroyed herself. As the car pulled into a parking structure, Amara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the driver, signaling that they had arrived. Samantha was escorted out of the car and into the building, her legs feeling like they might collapse under her. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though she were walking toward her final judgment. They entered a large, sterile room where a meeting was about to take place. A table was set up, surrounded by high-ranking employees from SkyVista Airlines. Samantha knew what was coming. There was no escaping it now. Amara, walking with the same cool, controlled demeanor she had throughout this entire ordeal, took her seat at the head of the table. Samantha was directed to sit across from her. As she took her seat, she could feel the weight of every eye on her. The room was cold, not just from the sterile environment, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Everyone was waiting for her to speak, but there was nothing left to say. She had already sealed her fate. Amara began the meeting, her voice steady and commanding. "We're here today to address an issue that cannot be overlooked. One of our flight attendants has violated company policy. We are conducting an internal review, and this meeting will be part of that process." Samantha sat still, her face flush with shame. She had no defense left. Her actions had spoken louder than any excuse she could make. The room went silent for a moment as everyone absorbed what had just been said. Amara's gaze lingered on Samantha, unflinching. She didn't need to say more. The silence between them spoke volumes. After a few more moments, one of the other executives spoke up. But Samantha wasn't really listening anymore. The words, the judgment, were all distant sounds to her now. Amara had already won, and in a way, so had the entire room. Samantha Doyle's career had been erased in a single moment, and all she could do was sit there and let it happen. Amara Collins had seen to it that the rules of the game were now hers to define, and Samantha would never forget that. The room remained silent as Amara calmly continued, her words cutting through the heavy air. Everything has consequences, and today we've seen what happens when someone forgets that. She glanced at Samantha, her expression unreadable. You assumed I didn't belong in that seat. You assumed I wasn't worthy of being there. And that mistake cost you everything. Samantha's hands trembled on the table in front of her. She could feel the weight of Amara's gaze, unrelenting. She opened her mouth, wanting to speak, to explain herself, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? She had been wrong. She had been arrogant. And now there was nothing left to defend. Amara continued, her voice softer, but still filled with authority. I could have overlooked this, Samantha. I could have let you continue on, but you crossed a line. You crossed a line that even I cannot ignore. And that is why you are here. She paused, letting the silence settle over the room. The board has already decided. You're no longer fit for this job. Samantha felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This was it. The end. The end of her career, her pride, her power. Everything she had built up over the years had crumbled in one devastating moment. The room was eerily quiet, every person in it watching her, waiting for her response. But Samantha had no response. She had no defense. She had no place to go but down. The chair beneath her felt like it was closing in on her. She wanted to disappear, to escape, but there was no way out now. The executive sitting next to her cleared his throat and spoke up, his voice clinical and detached. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. You will be escorted off the premises, and your access to Sky Vista Airlines will be permanently revoked. Samantha's vision blurred as she fought to keep her composure. Her entire world was shattering around her, and she could do nothing to stop it. Amara watched silently as the executive delivered the verdict. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no joy in watching Samantha crumble. This was business. This was the consequence of someone's actions. There was no personal vendetta, no revenge, just the harsh reality of cause and effect. The rest of the meeting passed in a haze for Samantha. She could hear the voices around her, but they were distant, muffled by the pounding of her own heart in her chest. Finally, the meeting came to an end. The executive stood and left the room, not sparing her a second glance. Amara, however, remained seated, her gaze never leaving Samantha. Samantha stood up slowly, her legs weak. She was escorted out of the room by the security officers, each step feeling heavier than the last. The humiliation was unbearable. The entire building felt like it was closing in on her, each hallway a reminder of the life she had just lost. As they reached the door, Samantha hesitated. She could feel Amara's presence behind her, as if she were still watching, waiting. With a deep breath, she stepped out into the cold, empty hallway, knowing that there would be no turning back. The world outside felt different, colder, harsher than she had ever imagined. The security officers remained at her side, their silence deafening as they led her to the exit. Every step was a reminder of the life she had built, and how quickly it had been torn apart. As she reached the airport's exit, Samantha saw the final moment approaching. She would be escorted from this building, from this world of power and privilege, and cast into obscurity. The doors of the airport opened, and she was guided toward a waiting car. The vehicle wasn't hers. It wasn't even her choice. It was just a ride to nowhere. The realization was suffocating. She had no place left. She had lost everything.
Inside the car, she sat still, her gaze fixed on the dark, empty road ahead. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. Her hands shook as she gripped the seat. The consequences of her actions weighed heavily on her, a burden that she would carry for the rest of her life.
The journey felt like an eternity. The city outside seemed so distant, so foreign now. She had once ruled this world, but now she was just another forgotten soul in the crowd. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The car eventually stopped at a small, unremarkable building on the outskirts of town. The security officers motioned for her to get out. Samantha didn't hesitate. She didn't want to draw it out any longer. She stepped out of the car and into the cold night air. Her future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The path she had once walked was closed. No one would ever trust her again. No one would ever give her a second chance. She had burned every bridge, destroyed every opportunity. And now, she would have to face the consequences. The world didn't wait for people like her. The world moved on. And she would be left behind. As she stood in the dark, staring at the ground, her mind raced. The arrogance, the assumptions, the judgments, they had led her here, to this moment of reckoning. She had thought she was untouchable. She had thought she could control everything. But in the end, it was her own actions that had undone her. With one final glance at the car that had brought her here, she turned and walked away. No one would remember her name. Samantha walked down the street, each step heavier than the last. The world around her seemed distant, like she was moving through a fog. The life she had once known felt like a memory, one that was quickly slipping away. She could still feel the sting of Amara's words, the finality of her dismissal. Every moment since then had been a blur. The sharpness of the humiliation, the overwhelming weight of her own failure, it all threatened to crush her. But there was no one to blame but herself. She had let her arrogance, her assumptions about others guide her actions. She had assumed she was better, more deserving. And now, the price of that arrogance was everything she had worked for, gone in an instant. The street was quiet, the sounds of the city muted in the distance. Samantha had nowhere to go. No friends, no allies, no safe place to turn to. She had burned all of her bridges in pursuit of a status she no longer held. She had thought she was untouchable, but now she was just like everyone else. Ordinary, forgotten. Her hands were shaking as she pulled her jacket tighter around her, trying to stave off the cold. But no amount of warmth could shield her from the emptiness that had consumed her. Hours passed, but it felt like days. She wandered the streets aimlessly, unsure of what to do next. The night was deepening, and the reality of her situation was beginning to settle in. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and stared at the screen. A message from her former colleague. It was a simple text. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry." It was a kind message, but it stung. She didn't deserve sympathy. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, but she couldn't find the words to respond. Nothing could fix what had happened. Nothing could undo the mistakes she had made. As the hours stretched on, Samantha found herself standing in front of a small diner. The bright lights outside were a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in her mind. She had no destination, no plan, but the ache in her stomach told her that she needed to eat. The warmth inside the diner was a small comfort. She sat at the counter, ordering something simple, anything to fill the emptiness that had settled inside her. But even the food couldn't fill the void. Her mind kept returning to Amara, to the way she had so effortlessly dismantled everything Samantha had built. There was no escaping the truth. Amara had won, and Samantha had lost. The minutes dragged on as she ate in silence, the weight of the past few hours pressing down on her. She could still hear Amara's calm voice in her mind. "You crossed a line." The truth of that statement cut deeper than any punishment. Samantha had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. When she finished eating, she stood up, paying for the meal without speaking to anyone. The walk back to her small apartment felt just as empty as the one before it. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Her apartment was no sanctuary. It was just a place where she would have to face the harsh truth of her failure. As she unlocked the door, she stood there for a moment, gathering herself. There was nothing left to do but go inside, face the silence, and figure out what came next. She sat on her bed, the weight of everything sinking in. Her career was over. Her life, as she knew it, had come to an abrupt halt, and there was no way to undo it. The thought of starting over was overwhelming. The road ahead seemed impossible, but she knew she had no choice. She would have to rebuild from the ground up, but it would never be the same. She would never be the same. Samantha lay down in the dark, staring at the ceiling. She could hear the city outside, the sound of life moving on without her. She had once been someone important, someone who commanded respect. But now, she was just another person lost in the crowd. Her eyes closed, and she drifted off to sleep, the weight of the day still heavy on her chest. But even in her sleep, she couldn't escape the truth. Amara Collins had taken everything from her, not because she wanted to, but because Samantha had given it all away. The world had moved on, and so had Amara. Samantha had been left behind, forced to confront the consequences of her own choices. And in the end, that was the hardest truth to face. The morning came too quickly, with the harsh light streaming through the blinds and piercing the room with a reminder that the world kept turning. Samantha awoke to the same cold reality. Her mind was heavy, her body sore from the weight of everything she had endured. The silence in her apartment was deafening. It was as if the entire world had moved on and she was the only one left behind. She sat up slowly, her feet touching the cold floor. Her fingers brushed her phone, but she hesitated to check it. She already knew there would be no messages of support, no words of encouragement. The world had forgotten her. Just as quickly as she had been cast aside, Samantha forced herself to get dressed, but it felt like a hollow routine. She no longer cared about appearances, no longer cared about the facade she had carefully built over the years. It all seemed so meaningless now. She stepped out into the streets, but the familiar cityscape no longer brought her any comfort. The bustling streets, the noise, the people, it all felt distant, as if she were observing it all from afar. She had no purpose now, no direction. Hours passed, but she barely noticed the time. She walked aimlessly through the city, the weight of her past decisions dragging her every step. The shame was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. She could feel it in every glance she received from strangers, in every whisper she imagined behind her back. She stopped by a cafe, ordering a coffee, but it tasted like cardboard in her mouth. She barely noticed the hot liquid as she sipped it slowly, staring blankly at the table in front of her. Her phone buzzed again. It was from her former colleague, just like last time. "I'm sorry for what happened. Let me know if you need anything." She didn't know how to respond. What could she say? She had already destroyed everything. There was no going back. The message lingered on her screen. But she didn't reply. Instead, she put the phone back into her pocket and left the cafe. The day dragged on, and with every passing hour, she felt more and more like a ghost. That night, she sat alone in her apartment once again. She couldn't escape the crushing weight of what had happened. She had built her identity on power, on the belief that she was untouchable. But now, all of it was gone. Amara had taken it from her without even trying. She had effortlessly shown Samantha the limits of her arrogance, her self-righteousness, and her assumptions about others. The cost of that was everything she had worked for: the career, the respect, the power. All vanished in an instant. Samantha closed her eyes, trying to push away the thoughts. But they kept coming back. The humiliation, the regret, the realization that she had brought this upon herself. She reached for the bottle of wine on her counter and poured herself a glass. The wine didn't bring relief, but at least it dulled the edge for a little while. She drank it quickly, as if to numb herself against the truth that continued to haunt her. The night passed, and the weight of the following morning loomed over her. There was no escape. She had to face the consequences of her actions, and there was no quick fix. She couldn't go back to her old life. The person she had been was gone, and the person she had become was still too broken to rebuild. Samantha woke up the next morning with the same numbness. There was no relief. She sat in front of her mirror, looking at the reflection of a woman she no longer recognized. Her hair disheveled from the restless night, and her eyes darkened with exhaustion and shame. The life she had once held in her hands felt like a distant memory. She had been someone who commanded respect. Now she was someone who had lost it all. The days turned into weeks, and while the world around her continued to move forward, Samantha remained stuck in the same place. She had nothing to hold on to, nothing to guide her. She visited her former workplace once, but it felt like walking into a place that no longer belonged to her. She was a stranger there now, an outsider in her own world. One evening she found herself sitting in a park, staring blankly at the children playing in the distance. The carefree joy in their faces only made her feel more acutely aware of what she had lost. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her colleague. The board has finalized their decision. You've been officially terminated from Sky Vista Airlines. You can appeal, but it's unlikely to change anything. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. There was no hope, no chance to turn things around. Her career, her identity, her pride, all of it had been taken away from her. The future stretched before her like a vast, empty space. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know if she could ever rebuild. But she knew one thing for sure. She could never go back to who she was. She had crossed a line, and now she had to live with the consequences. Samantha stood up, her legs shaky. It wasn't over yet, not for her, but she couldn't keep drowning in the past. She had to find a way to survive. Somehow, and maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to rebuild. But it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same. As the weeks continued to pass, Samantha found herself getting used to the emptiness. The world outside continued to spin, oblivious to her struggles, and she remained trapped in the aftermath of her fall from grace. The days felt like an endless cycle of waking up, going through the motions, and trying to silence the voice in her head that reminded her of every mistake she had made. She visited a few job interviews, but the rejection was always inevitable. The shadow of her past, her arrogance, her assumptions, her catastrophic mistake, followed her wherever she went. No one would give her a chance. They all saw her as a failure, and worse yet, she saw herself that way too. One afternoon, as she walked through the city, she passed a storefront and caught her reflection in the window. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked older than she felt, the lines on her face deeper, the sadness in her eyes more pronounced. Her confidence had once been her armor, but now it felt like a distant memory. Samantha stopped for a moment, letting the realization hit her. She had let herself become this person. The woman she used to be, confident, poised, a leader, was gone. and the woman standing in front of the window was all that was left. She turned away from the reflection, the weight of it all almost too much to bear. But then, something unexpected happened. A call came in, an unfamiliar number. For a moment, Samantha hesitated. Was it another rejection? Another reminder that her life had been torn apart? She almost didn't answer, but something inside her told her to pick up. "Hello? Samantha?" The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Megan, the flight attendant who had been part of the confrontation with Amara. Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. She had not heard from Megan since the day everything had fallen apart. "Yeah, it's me," Samantha said, trying to keep her voice steady. I just wanted to check in on you," Megan continued, sounding hesitant. "I know things have been tough, and I didn't know if you needed someone to talk to." Samantha was silent for a long moment. She wasn't sure what to say. Megan was the last person she expected to hear from, given how everything had unfolded. "Thanks," Samantha finally said, "but I don't think I can talk about it right now." Megan's voice softened. "I get it. I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you ever need to talk. And I think you deserve a second chance. Whatever happened, it doesn't have to define you." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a small lifeline, but she wasn't sure if she could believe them. Could she really start over? Could she rebuild? She didn't know, but hearing Megan's voice, hearing that someone cared enough to reach out, felt like the first glimmer of hope she had experienced in weeks. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Samantha said, her voice quiet. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by taking one step at a time," Megan said firmly. "That's all any of us can do. And you're stronger than you think." Samantha closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Could she really rebuild her life from the ashes? She didn't know, but hearing Megan's words made her feel, for the first time in weeks, like it might be possible. The next day, Samantha woke up with a small spark of determination. She had spent too long wallowing in self-pity, too long feeling sorry for herself. She couldn't keep doing that. It was time to start moving forward, even if the path ahead was unclear. She spent the day working on her resume, making phone calls, looking for opportunities. It was a slow process, and it felt overwhelming at times. But she kept at it. Every small step forward felt like a victory, even if it was hard to see the bigger picture. Weeks turned into months, and while the road was still difficult, Samantha began to find her footing again. She got a part-time job working at a cafe, just something to pay the bills for now. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She didn't expect everything to change overnight, but she was finally doing something. She was moving forward, and that, she realized, was enough for now. One evening, after her shift, Samantha sat down at a bench in the park, watching the sunset. She didn't feel like the same person who had fallen so far from grace. She didn't feel like the woman who had been consumed by her own pride. But she also didn't feel like she had completely rebuilt herself. There was still a long road ahead. She was still learning to live with the consequences of her actions, but she was starting to accept them. Samantha closed her eyes, taking in the evening air, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't there yet, but she was on her way, and that, she realized, was enough. The days passed slowly, but Samantha began to feel the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders piece by piece. The shame of her past mistakes, while still present, no longer consumed her. She had taken the first steps toward rebuilding, and for the first time, she could see a faint light at the end of the tunnel. She still worked at the cafe, and it wasn't glamorous, but it gave her a routine. It gave her purpose. Each day she was reminded that small actions, no matter how insignificant they seemed, could add up to something bigger. One morning, as she prepared for another long shift, she received an email from an unfamiliar address. She clicked it open, almost without thinking. It was from Jonathan Blake, the CEO of SkyVista Airlines. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it a mistake? Had someone found out about her? Was this yet another consequence she hadn't anticipated? But as she read through the email, her fingers gripping the phone tighter, her eyes widened. "Samantha," the email began, "I am writing to inform you that the board has reconsidered the matter regarding your termination. While your actions were regrettable, the board has decided to offer you a second chance with SkyVista Airlines. We would like to discuss the possibility of your reemployment in a different capacity. Please reach out to HR if you are interested in this opportunity." Samantha sat frozen, the words in the email blurring in front of her eyes. A second chance? Could this really be happening? She had given up all hope of ever returning to the life she had known, the job she had once taken for granted. And yet, here it was, an offer she hadn't dared dream about. But even as she read the email again, she knew that accepting it wasn't going to be easy. There were too many things to consider. Could she even step back into that world? Was she ready for the scrutiny, the responsibility? And most importantly, did she truly deserve it? For the next few days, Samantha wrestled with herself. The idea of returning to SkyVista was both tempting and terrifying. She wanted to prove to herself that she could be better, that she could take responsibility for her actions and rise above her mistakes. But at the same time, she feared returning to a world that had once rejected her, a world that had seen her as nothing more than a failure. She decided to call Megan. The sound of her voice, kind and steady, brought some clarity to Samantha's confused thoughts. "I got an email from the company," Samantha explained hesitantly. "They want to give me a second chance." Megan was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "What do you want to do?" Samantha sighed, her voice shaky. "I don't know. I keep thinking about it. Part of me wants to go back, to prove I can do better. But part of me is afraid that I'll fall back into the same patterns. I don't know if I can handle it." Megan's response was simple, but it cut through the noise in Samantha's mind. "Whatever you decide, you're not the same person you were before. You've changed. Don't let the past define your future. And if you do go back, do it for the right reasons." Samantha let Megan's words settle in her mind. Don't let the past define your future. It was the push she needed. She couldn't keep running from her mistakes, but she also couldn't let them keep her trapped in the same place. The only way forward was through the uncertainty, through the fear. With a deep breath, she made her decision. The next day, she called HR at SkyVista. The conversation was brief, professional, but it was a first step toward reclaiming a part of her life. She would meet with them the following week. The week of the meeting arrived, and Samantha felt a nervous excitement build in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that this was her opportunity, her chance to prove that she could do better. When she walked into the SkyVista office, the familiar feeling of the lobby hit her hard. It was strange, seeing the same faces, hearing the same sounds. It felt both comforting and suffocating. She had once belonged here, but now everything felt different. The meeting was straightforward. The HR director, a woman named Sarah, was kind but firm as she went over the terms of reemployment. Samantha was offered a new role, one with less responsibility, but it was a start. It wasn't the same position she had once held, but it was still an opportunity to prove herself again. Samantha left the office feeling a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She had been given another chance, but it wasn't going to be easy. There was still a long road ahead, and she knew that she couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. Over the next few months, Samantha settled into her new role. The work was less glamorous, less demanding, but it allowed her the space to rebuild. She focused on her tasks, learning from her past mistakes, and doing her best to prove herself, not just to the company, but to herself. She made slow progress, but every small victory felt meaningful. She gained the respect of her new colleagues, and she began to see that she was capable of more than she had realized. One afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing some documents, she received a message from Megan. "I heard you're doing great. Proud of you, Sam." The simple message filled her with a sense of warmth. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could overcome her past and build something new. The road wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she questioned if she was truly on the right path. But Samantha knew that each step forward, no matter how small, was a step in the right direction. She wasn't the same person she had been before, and maybe that was the greatest victory of all. As time passed, Samantha began to truly rebuild her life. It wasn't a smooth or easy process, but she was no longer haunted by the weight of her past mistakes. She had learned to embrace each step of progress, no matter how small, and to forgive herself for the choices she had made. She worked harder than ever, not because she felt pressured to, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could be better. Each task, each project became a reflection of her growth, not just as an employee, but as a person. One evening, as she walked through the city after work, Samantha found herself smiling for the first time in a long while. It wasn't a carefree smile, but one that acknowledged how far she had come. The journey had been difficult, but she was finally starting to feel like herself again. As she passed the park where she had once sat in despair, she stopped for a moment and looked around. The familiar surroundings no longer felt like a reminder of her failure, but rather a symbol of how far she had come. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. The following week, Samantha was called into a meeting with her new manager, a woman named Claudia. Claudia had been supportive from the beginning, always encouraging Samantha to grow and do her best. "Samantha, I wanted to let you know that we've been impressed with your progress over the last few months," Claudia said, her tone warm but professional. "The team has noticed how hard you've been working, and we want to offer you a more significant role. This would come with more responsibility, but I believe you're ready for it." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. A more significant role? She had come so far, but she hadn't expected this. Her first instinct was to hesitate. Was she really ready? But then she remembered the lessons she had learned. She had been given a second chance, and this was another one. "Thank you, Claudia," Samantha said, her voice steady. "I appreciate the opportunity. I'll do my best." That night, Samantha returned home with a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. She had earned this. It wasn't the life she had once dreamed of, but it was one she could be proud of. She thought back to the woman she had been, the confident, arrogant woman who had lost everything. But she also thought about the woman she was becoming, the woman who had fought her way back, who had learned to embrace humility and growth. It was a new chapter for her, one where she could no longer take anything for granted. But it was a chapter she was ready to write. A few months later, things continued to improve. Samantha's new role was challenging, but it was exactly what she needed. She had earned the respect of her colleagues, and most importantly, she had earned it from herself. One evening, after another long day at work, she received a text from Megan. "How's the new job going?" "I'm so proud of you, Sam. You've really come a long way." Samantha smiled as she read the message. The simple words were a reminder of how far she had come. There was still much to do, but she no longer felt like a failure. She felt like someone who had reclaimed her life, piece by piece. As she sat down on her couch, sipping a cup of tea, Samantha realized that the journey she had been on had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't the person she had been before. The past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. The city outside her window was bustling with life, but for the first time in a long while, Samantha felt at peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. The mistakes of her past had led her here, and although it hadn't been easy, she had come to understand that every mistake was a lesson, every failure an opportunity to her growth. She wasn't perfect, and she would never be, but she had learned to accept herself, flaws and all. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. Samantha stood up, looking out the window. The night sky was calm, the stars twinkling softly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. She had fought hard to get here, and she knew that no matter what came next, she would continue to fight. She would never give up on herself again, because in the end, the only person who could truly define her was herself. Do you believe that just one arrogant moment can ruin a 15-year successful career? What do you think when true power doesn't need to shout, but only requires a cold glance? If you love intense, emotional stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Now, let's dive into this gripping story. And then, when the airport door closed behind Samantha Doyle, she didn't just lose her job. She lost her entire career, her dignity, and her very self. One moment of prejudice, one thoughtless action, a price too high to turn back. Because sometimes true power isn't about controlling others, but about controlling the bias within yourself. Today's story isn't just a lesson for an individual, but a reminder for all of us. Don't rush to judge someone just because they are different, because that difference sometimes carries power far beyond imagination. If you feel this story touched your emotions, don't forget to like the video to support the channel, share to spread this meaningful lesson, and subscribe to catch more emotional stories. What do you think about the outcome of Samantha Doyle? Does she deserve the price she had to pay? Leave a comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts.